Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Scholar AI Founders Pod. Make sure to find us on all of your typical podcast channels and find us on our YouTube. Be sure to leave comments in the sections below, and we'll get to them in upcoming episodes. So today I'm joined by Shashi and Lakshay, and we're going to be discussing some tech trends, some kind of heat that's falling on Amazon for maybe the injection of ads where they previously were advertised not to be, and some other things. So happy to have you here. Again, feel free to engage the conversation down below. So Shashi, why don't you start us off? You kind of teed this conversation up in the Slack. We're going to go with Amazon to begin. So Amazon kind of, I think, has been at least alleged of misleading users and maybe injecting ads where they previously had said there wouldn't be. So why don't you set the stage?
A Prime subscriber has filed a lawsuit saying Amazon is not fulfilling its promise, which is to have unlimited Prime Video downloads and use for streaming to its subscribers. So what's the substance? Notably, Prime Video is now either showing ads as you watch Prime Video content, or they're asking you to pay $2.99 a month in additional fees in order to watch ad-free Prime Video. Prime Video spent over $1 billion on Lord of the Rings, the series, the continuation of the previous Lord of the Rings series, and the streaming wars have resulted in most of the streamers essentially not making very much money. It's turned into a winner-take-all, with Netflix really leading that market and everything else being a financial loser for the most part. Disney's experienced this as well and has made a pivot to try to recuperate from that position. I find markets to trend in either top line direction or bottom line direction. For a while, all of these streaming companies were prioritizing top line, make your customers happy, bring in more customers, gather market share. All of those things are a focus on top line. And what happens after a time of burn is the energy shifts to being bottom line focused. And what I see with Amazon is they're now shifting energy, especially with Prime Video, but kind of across the board is the impression I get that Amazon is shifting to being bottom line focused. What does that mean? It means higher pricing, less customer friendliness, more stringency in their use to maximize the financial results for shareholders. So there's this constant kind of balancing act that companies play between the three stakeholder groups. There's employees, there's customers, and there's shareholders. And there's this balancing act that every company has to go through. Startups tend to start very customer oriented because that's really where the center of gravity is. Mature companies tend to gravitate over time toward profit orientation, shareholder orientation. And this signals to me is that Amazon is tilting now toward profit shareholder orientation.
Yeah, I think adding a little bit of context, I think that makes a lot of sense in the broader market. People are themselves as consumers tightening their belts. That might mean fewer subscriptions, foregoing Amazon Prime because they can do their grocery shopping locally, that kind of thing. And then in Amazon's effort to kind of recoup and while also growing revenue, it feels like the most likely of payers is advertisers. And I said leading into this conversation that it is kind of a emerging thesis of mine that mature businesses, except for a select few that I can think of, do mature to a point in which ads become a significant fraction of their revenue. So Uber being another prime example of, in the beginning, they were simply a transport company. And I don't mean to completely oversimplify, but they basically moved people and then as an extension of that, goods from point A to point B. Now they realize they have a massive audience with people regularly tuning in, whether it be in the form of Uber Eats or taking car rides, and they're selling ads, right? They're serving ads. So don't just buy in Uber Eats, but buy from our curated list of sponsored grocery stores or restaurants. And so, I think that it's just this never ending battle of people trying to strive for growth and then mixed with a suppressed or at least a timid economic climate right now. I think that ads makes a there's a reasonable argument for ads. Unfortunately, as consumers, that means we have to now begin choosing whether we're going to pay the premium package, which typically exists, which is ad free, or if we're going to opt for a slightly reduced cost package that includes ads, or if we're going to kind of, forego that streaming service altogether. I don't know. Lakshay, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just find, I mean, every now and again, the streaming service will announce like, okay, we're interested in ads. We're going to add a tier of payment that like removes ads for you. And it tends to obviously lead to like a good level of customer revolt, rightly so, especially if the precedent was you're just streaming here, nothing else. I think what will be interesting, I guess, is that a lot of streaming like loyalty, just talking about that product specifically, has to do with the content you have on your platform or like what content your platform regularly delivers, right? Netflix, of course, distributes all sorts of stuff. They have originals, and that way you can kind of like you have a sense of what their brand is, even if not all their content's original. Disney, of course, has everything Disney, Paramount, HBO. They all have a like a set of content tied to their brand, whereas Amazon, at least in my like anecdotal experience, is very much that if I'm watching something on Prime, it's because I wanted to watch something I happened to find on Prime, right? So it feels like the customer decision, like, oh, I'm suddenly going to pay for a subscription to this service to remove ads. It feels unlikely to me. Like I feel like if I were to have to pick between like getting rid of ads on Hulu or HBO Max versus Prime, I'd choose one of the others, but not Prime. And so I think like in the growing like trend of just like people reducing their subscriptions, just choosing like, the bare minimum that they need, it feels like paying for adless Prime is not one that's generally going to be favorable. Um, I don't know. I just like when I think about what Amazon has, like even the unique properties they had, the Lord of the Rings one being the like most significant in recent history. Like that wasn't like some like must watch show that like blew everything else out of the water. So it feels like they don't. To me, it feels like the brand doesn't have the content library it needs to justify paying $4 a month to get rid of ads for that experience.
As a millennial, I'm super annoyed that we started with this cable subscription thing where we got all of our content from one channel and it was just simple, like a single common interface point. We unbundled everything into all these streamers, which made the UX really hard and annoying and to like figure out where to stream a show from. And now as a net, we're spending a lot more than we used to spend. This whole process could have been avoided if the Xfinities and the AT&Ts had just made everything they had in their library available to stream. Like we would have skipped so many steps in this progression and we would have still
Mm-hmm.
maintained the single user interface and they would have maintained the monopoly in this market. And instead they were inflexible in their approach and they lost all this value to the Netflixes of the world. So as a millennial, I just have this frustration and angst about how this process has unfolded to spending more money for like more worse user experience. The other comment I have is about pricing power. What we've seen is Netflix significantly increasing price and maintaining subscribers. We're now seeing Amazon kind of insert ads, reduce their Dolby. They took away Dolby access unless you pay for their higher tier, $2.99 per month fee. And we're seeing pricing power play out in the market. We're seeing who has and who doesn't have pricing power. I'm unlikely to cancel Prime because of the shipping benefit. So I'm unlikely to be frustrated enough. I'm unlikely to cancel Netflix, even with the higher price. So demonstrating an example of pricing power that they have. Pricing power comes from dependency. It comes from becoming kind of the default critical infrastructure to get a job done, which is a lesson for every business, including ours. But when a company uses pricing power, it becomes a real test of the relationship. And in a way, even though I'm unlikely to cancel Netflix or unlikely to cancel Amazon Prime, my relationship with them has fundamentally shifted in a way that it feels more transactional and less devoted because they've used that pricing power.
Yeah, I think all good points. My thoughts on the bundling, unbundling, and then rebundling that you've described. I've lived through not quite as long of the arc as you have, but similarly. Yeah, I think what we fundamentally gained in that process was an ability to kind of take it with us everywhere and watch shows on demand, right? But you're right. There's no reason that the prior infrastructure couldn't have supported that had they just simply gone to, the detethering of us to a physical box, which is what they used to kind of protect the content with. So yeah, it felt like the transition was probably fair and obvious. Again, with hindsight being 2020, that if you do remember, Netflix did start by shipping physical DVDs to people. So, I think that in some ways the market developed. But yeah, I'm similar to you in that it does feel to me like Amazon specifically and Prime Video they're okay with that being a loss leader because what they're really going after is the Amazon Prime subscribers so that they kind of ship goods to their house using that lower cost shipping method. So I'm like you. I probably wouldn't churn from the Amazon Prime Video of it all, but I have thought recently about maybe churning from other ones like Hulu as an example, where I just don't find that much additional value in and just don't find myself watching it very often. For whatever reason, um, not really a reason I think I could put my finger on. Netflix does just have a little bit more staying power, at least in my current perception, than the other ones. I don't know that I could tell you that the content is objectively that much better. So,
It's three. So what the way they're changing is subscription for Prime generally stays the same. You're just paying an extra $3.99 for the Prime Video that comes with that to be adless, right? Yeah. So in that case, I probably like same outlook. Like the Prime benefit, like I've always kind of looked at video just like an addendum to like having shipping benefits and all the other like Prime delivery and Prime Day, whatever deals. Um, And so like I've never like I wouldn't say I've like actively thought about like Prime Video as its own subscription, but I'm still not gonna pay for Atlas. Like that's just not worth it to me anyway.
I think as a slight tangent, I think the only adless experience that I felt very confident in my eagerness to pay for time and time again is YouTube Premium. That said, YouTube Premium on the in the mid rolls specifically is becoming so pervasive that it's just an ad shift. It's now no longer ad free. It's just ads driven directly by the creators and not at all by the platform itself.
Mm.
So again, back to my kind of thesis, like we go in this loop of ads, no ads, ads as businesses mature, as people kind of, reach that saturation point. The unfortunate reality is a lot of people's budgets, businesses specifically, go to ads, right? It's like kind of the famous example of most startups just end up spending their investor money on Facebook, Meta, and Google ads, right? So it just all one big loop.
By inserting so much kind of leverage of pricing power, these companies in a way invite competition. YouTube has such an incredible advantage in audience and network effects. The network effects of that business from both the content producer and content consumer sides are just incredibly strong. But some of these other businesses that try to operate in the same way, that kind of lean into their pricing power, ultimately create room for competition that just provides a better user experience, an easier entry point without the friction of these monetizing points like ads.
Yeah. I think pulling on that thread a little bit, I want to kind of switch gears, introduce a concept or, videos that we've seen over the last week or so with OpenAI's announcement of their new Sora model, which is their text to video model. I'll try to weave those ideas together later because there was a new announcement today, I believe, from Reddit or otherwise, that Reddit is kind of selling their data to an undisclosed AI company for around $60 million. So I want to start with the Sora discussion, and I want to kind of talk about the kind of what that means for other companies similar to YouTube that I think are sitting on valuable data repositories and where that kind of all might interweave. But let's start with you. Any initial reaction to Sora, both with the specifics of maybe how good that model is, how it affects other potential startups, just kind of what your debrief is?
Yeah, I'm very, very impressed. I think anyone who sees it should be very impressed. When I first saw like there was a video from a channel called Corridor Digital, maybe like a year or so ago, where what they did is that they like heavily mocapped, like heavily like they're a bunch of CGI artists that run a YouTube channel, heavily mocapped, like put together a video where like I think Midjourney was very much participating in like creating the graphics and creating the visuals. And so I ended up cartoony, very has like all the typical issues you'd expect a stable diffusion video to have, but they post process it to make it weave together more nicely, have consistent character design, all that sort of stuff, right? And even when that came up, it started like a good amount of controversy, just amongst like creatives, especially, and people in like the film industry, people who are directors, about like what that means for the like creative process. And my personal reaction is that like it just seems super exciting that you can go from like idea to storyboard just like that much more quickly, and like being able to like create video and create cinematic content is that much more trivial. But it's almost like it's really exciting in one way, and it's really scary in others, because some of those videos, like I would not have for a second like thought that that wasn't like a real bit of footage of like just a real place. I would just assume like, hey, that's just some standard island with some waves lapping on it, if I did not know it was an AI video and I was looking out for that. So just very, very impressive. I think this is going to have a lot of interesting like applications at the bare minimum. But it'll also be interesting to see what this means for like, okay, all of a sudden now there's very, very realistic video rendering. We already have a bunch of text to speech models. What does that mean for like identity? What does that mean for user like recognition? What does it mean for content that we put out in the world? That I think leaves a lot to be answered. On the other side, I do think it's good that OpenAI released it the way they did, where they said it's only for red teamers right now and just limited video creators. So there's a chance for like market regulation, government to kind of respond in a way.
It's really impressive. Sora's demos. I haven't used the product obviously, but the demo videos are really impressive, and the the B-roll kind of footage, the secondary footage, is probably the easiest place for something like this to immediately get inserted, where you don't have to pay for the extras, the additional film crews, the cost of all those things can probably be saved if, for example, you start with some images of your key scenes and then you have some secondary images generated to supplement the story to kind of fill gaps. So I can see those kinds of use cases being immediately beneficial. Things like short commercials, for example, could also be a great use case. We talked about advertising, but small companies that can't afford big budget ads can create compelling ads via this kind of interface. I can see lots of really great use cases where this gets used, and it will only get better, presumably in the next iteration. So as this first iteration comes out and they get feedback and see where the cracks in the output are, they'll be able to improve upon it. I'd also like to shout out a group called Curious Refuge. Founders are Caleb and Shelby. They teach an AI filmmaking class that I've met the founders. They're really bright, and they do a great job with their filmmaking class using AI techniques. They've used Runway and Midjourney so far. We'll probably incorporate Sora soon, I would imagine. But yeah, all in all, I think this is what Sam Altman was alluding to in the last Dev Day talk. One of the many things that will come out soon that will make what they do at the time feel quaint, and models like Sora start to give you that impression that what they did in Dev Day does feel quaint given what's on the horizon.
Yeah, I think that my interest and fascination with it is exactly what you said, Josh. I also think we might be heading towards a world in which there is a category of self-selected content. So rather than sitting down to Netflix, to bridge this back to our earlier conversation, and watching pre-selected shows, there are these text to video models that kind of allow you to craft your own show, or maybe even inject kind of a personal spin on your favorite show. So rather than watching a show from a singular point of view, you might be able to use AI to extrapolate that content into something that is more interesting to you. In addition to maybe making brand new shows, that kind of thing. I do want to note in the moment though that as of right now, at least the Sora models that I've seen, you can't make small edits. Meaning, like if you just try, basically it's text in, one video out, and then if you have a new text prompt, it's another whole new video out. So there isn't really this iterative process of making subtle changes to videos, keeping kind of the core of the singular video there, iterating on the periphery as much as there is just like a complete remixing of the video every time it comes out. So that's definitely something that's going to have to come if it's going to be injected into the creative process as we know it right now, right? So even sometimes in like ChatGPT, if you're just doing some sort of text overall, it has a tendency to remake the entire body of text it spit out to you rather than just editing it as you would like it. So you end up having to revert to copying it, pasting it out somewhere else and editing it manually, which is fine, but I just don't know that you can do that with the Sora model. Go ahead, Josh, you got something on
To throw out a business idea, if someone could take content that's being produced, let's say a Game of Thrones episode, and let's say you were watching that in a movie theater setting. So a popular movie comes out, you identify closely with the character for your showing. You might be able to purchase. Let's say I spent an extra $100 and I'm the character that I identify with the most in the show. They just modify that character to look like me. So they take a picture of me when I get to the movie theater, update the character to look like me because I paid the fee for the rights to that showing, and then the movie has me in it. So that's the kind of experience that I think could become realistic in the not too distant future, and the revenue opportunities people I think would gladly pay for that kind of thing especially to kind of show off to their friends and family and have that experience. I bet that would be a big potential moneymaker.
I can already see the version of this where someone just like puts Nick Cage over every character in Gladiator and just calls it a day.
Yeah, we are headed for some interesting days. I think this is circular too with the comment I was going to make previously, Buckshay, which is just like I kind of share your trepidation a little bit with this stuff, and that we are going to have some sort of system that tells us what is and is not AI generated. I don't know how hard that is. Like I do think that we're headed for a little bit of a inflection point, at least in people's understanding. In many ways, Photoshop had this, but I think not to the degree that we're headed for right now. So I'm not really going to speculate as to what happens or whether it's good or bad, but I do think that we're headed for a point in which the distinction between AI generated content and not is going to become more and more difficult, and in many ways somewhat problematic, I think. So,
I mean, even with that, like it being an election year, there was a bit of news recently about like a scam call that like had the voice like impersonating Biden and just like calling voters, like saying all sorts of things. And obviously like that's amplified with video, where like video is a lot more easy to go viral and stuff gets reshared and blasted over the internet. Um, so we'll see, because I think like OpenAI has says that like every Sora generated video will have like a little like watermark thing, but like you can just like crop that whenever you want to. Like you to make a screen recording and like remove the evidence that this is an AI generated thing is pretty trivial, right? There's no as it currently stands, there's nothing to say like there's no tracing, I guess, of like video content and where it's sourced from and how to figure out where it came from, and it just doesn't exist in any real capacity at the current moment, which creates a lot of risks, I feel.
yeah, if only there was a technology in which people were chaining blocks together that would allow traceability of these artifacts.
Whoa.
So
Whoa. Whoa, Damon.
I do. I am. There's part of me that is quite curious if this does end up being kind of the critical use case for the blockchain infrastructure. I will be the first to admit that I'm not deep enough in that world to really be able to put those pieces together, but it does spark my curiosity to think like, we thought it was the global financial system. What if it's actually, traceable content online in a way that protects people's privacy, that creates some transparency in where things were created, where things were originated, who the ownerships, who the key stakeholders in those things are. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm not necessarily I'm neither pro nor anti crypto in general. But I do think the blockchain technology fundamentally enables things that haven't previously existed. And I do wonder if this is one of the use cases that will be very powerful. Any thoughts to OpenAI continuing to release these things and squash other potential startups? Do you think there's an entire, group of startups that were doing text to video that's now dead? Or you think those companies find footing elsewhere? Any thoughts on the potential of that?
I don't know. It feels like every week there's something OpenAI has done that has squashed some section of startups. I know there was I'm forgetting its name. It had like a rabbit looking icon, but they were also doing text to video, and they're like one of the first like prominent startups that was doing like prompt to video. I was very impressed by their demo, but like what OpenAI did definitely like, blows that out of the water. So I don't know. I don't know like what you pivot to if you're playing in the exact same space, aside from maybe being like cheaper, faster, better UI, UX or something, or just released sooner so your traction's earlier. Not sure. Because at least the other one, like if you wanted to do text to video right now, like that startup, you could do it instantly, whereas sorry, you're just waiting for an indefinite amount of time. It's hard to say. I think OpenAI just proves to be very, very fast and very, very capable of shipping really incredible things at a really regular cadence. So it's a weird thing to try and anticipate dancing around.
I can see the general purpose solution of Sora being really powerful for lots of those potential use cases. I can also see several potential use cases living at the edge of what Sora could do kind of directly and not really specialized for a use case. So I could see, for example, the user interface of vertical customization for a very specific audience being more valuable, more helpful than the general purpose solution that OpenAI will provide. And just as a secondary point, OpenAI has allowed employees to sell shares at an
Mm.
$86 billion valuation. So that's probably not entirely dis, uh, disconnected from Sora launching and kind of this continued pace of growth that OpenAI is showing. I found both of those things this week interesting.
Yep. Um, Changing gears slightly, going beyond OpenAI, we can return to some of the chip infrastructure conversations that we've had for a long time. Shashi, again, you kind of passed a message in the group Slack about NVIDIA and whether or not its nearing $2 trillion valuation was sustainable, a pros and cons. So you want to set the stage for that?
NVIDIA this week passed both Alphabet and Amazon in market cap. So now the third most valued company in the world after Microsoft and Apple. Its market cap is about 1.8 trillion. It's trading at 38 times forward earnings. So the question, and 38 times forward earnings, by the way, is still below their historical multiple, which is a little bit above that. So the question really is there still room to run for NVIDIA? Is there any end in sight, or is the stock and the company overpriced, overvalued? Worth noting that what NVIDIA produces is the design for the chips. It still relies on third-party manufacturers, particularly TSMC in Taiwan, to produce the goods that they design. So there is a significant dependency on NVIDIA, on TSMC, which could be a complication that many shareholders aren't pricing in. But what do you think, Lakshay?
Yeah, TSMC just continues to be like a linchpin for everything hardware. And I guess like it makes a lot of sense that like a lot of the conversations about hardware are what's NVIDIA going to do and what is like all this startup in the hardware space going to do. There's one critical piece that's in sort of an imminent danger right now, like an imminent uncertainty at the bare minimum. Um, and when I think about like NVIDIA, like I would think that like that IP still has value in and of itself. So even if like TSMC falters, like that might result in like a drop in like the market performance for a little bit, but you can pivot a bunch of startups. There's investment in the States for new manufacturing. Like it takes time to recover, but overall, just given NVIDIA's importance in the current state of computing, it feels like if if for whatever reason like something negative were to happen to NVIDIA, at the current state of the chip industry, it would happen to everybody, not just them. It just feels like their IP to me is like hyper valuable. And of course, there's definitely like a very significant wave of like everyone wants to be in AI, everyone's excited about GPUs especially. That's driving up a lot of interest in them specifically. I'll be, I guess there's opinions there. It's like what these other startups, these emerging companies that want to play in the chip space are going to do. But all in all, like to me, like them having a spot in the very current moment among like the top five value companies in the world makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think feel free anybody on the call to correct me if this is right, but I think AMD is maybe the second largest GPU manufacturer in the world, or at least maybe the second most popular. And I think similarly they do all of their manufacturing out in the third party as well, probably TSMC. Again, I don't know off the top of my head, but so I think I'm of a similar opinion that you, Lakshay, is that like anything that would kind of affect the chip market wouldn't be singular to NVIDIA, and if anything, it would continue its pole position, just maybe from a slightly more shaky foundation than the one that it is currently on. Again, I think just further reinforces Sam Altman's ideas that a different chip startup might be very difficult to achieve, but is maybe a bet worth taking just because if you can build something with valuable IP and a non-reliance on some third-party manufacturer or foundry system, there's probably some room to run there. We know there's market demand because NVIDIA can't sell their GPU, or they can't make their GPUs fast enough. Rather, they just simply can't meet demand. So, yeah, it's interesting leading the conversation specifically about NVIDIA, but just kind of opening it more broadly to investments at large. I also just wonder, with so much kind of risk capital sitting on the sidelines right now, how much more kind of general public investment might flow to NVIDIA, further increasing its valuation or its market cap if more money returns to the stock market, right? If all of a sudden interest rates reduce, people start pulling their money out of high yield savings and treasury bonds as an example and start putting it back in the market. I do wonder how much of that as a fraction flows to NVIDIA, further extending its valuation. So I don't know. It's kind of fascinating because it's one of a few outliers right now that still seem to be, outpacing, year over year returns or year over year, gains, if you will. While the rest of the market seems pretty well stagnant at the very best. But
the B100s are scheduled to come out, I believe, later this year and are supposedly a significant step up in performance over the current H100s. Any reaction to that new product and how that changes either the NVIDIA company or the way that the chip bottleneck is affecting kind of all the startups reliant on it?
This is this might be digressing a little bit from what you just prompted about, so I apologize. But they released last week this sort of like video demo of like chat with like RTX or something like that, where it's just like the large language model, like they'll just host one kind of natively on your GPU, speaks to all your documents, talks to everything, can browse your OS, whatever. Just like out of the like nothing, like no installs, nothing necessary. And I kind of feel just like beyond basically owning like the GPU space, they're kind of moving towards owning more of the software space related to GPUs. So I think like the production of a bigger, better GPU, like I think of course is like just always good. Like there's more intense models, there's bigger computational needs that's going to be satisfied. I think to me, what's really interesting about what they're doing is they're kind of in a way going vertical on AI in specific. Like it feels like a interesting set of maneuvers that like potentially they're kind of entering a competitive space with like what are traditional software companies because they already own the hardware that all these software companies run on. So we'll see. That didn't really directly answer your prompt, but what can you do?
My thinking is that as the highest level of GPUs advance and continue to get better, you get this trickle down effect where all the other GPUs kind of by design become cheaper and more accessible. And I do think that what Lakshay was saying is right in that what you end up with is very high performing devices that don't necessarily need to be cloud connected to run, small to medium weight models. So I think we're going to see Apple start to play in that space as well, where you have like an LLM running locally on your iPhone, on your Apple Watch as an example. And so you almost get this simultaneous like Internet of Things coupling while also this decoupling of a non-reliance on running a centralized model to where like almost every device can run its own model in addition to running kind of this connected model architecture where sure you can plug into the most powerful models whenever you need to, but for a lot of tasks like general web surfing or something like that, your local model is going to be just fine and you're going to be less Wi-Fi dependent. Maybe. Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of weaving of thoughts that need to kind of happen there. But it does feel to me like as GPU technology advances, the kind of on-device capabilities will continue to improve. Not exactly sure what the consequence of that is, other than maybe we kind of return to this reality that we've envisioned before, which is you're kind of interacting a lot with various models across all of your devices and almost unknowingly to yourself what model you're kind of interacting with. So not exactly sure good, bad, pros, cons of any of that, but I do find it interesting in any event.
Yeah, I'm excited for the future, I guess, where like compute requirements become small enough. I like kind of taking the other end, like the kind of trickle down effect you talk about, where like IoT and edge computing are just kind of ubiquitous, and you can just like, hey, I need to get a task done, and in this hypothetical future, there's just like a voice agent just like listening on your device. No need to call a server, just runs on its own, processes like, what should I use to cook this banana bread? And then it's done. I feel like it's an exciting future. It's still a little bit far away just because the supply chain of GPUs is so tight that's not like there's just GPUs boundlessly available for experimentation. But I think the added benefit you describe of like the more powerful GPUs get, the more accessible the smaller ones become is a appealing one very fundamentally.
To shift gears just a little bit. Um, I'm interested in a topic that we talked about maybe in our first or second pod episode, which is that in time, reading and writing will largely be the domain of AIs. And I'm interested in how that's starting to take place in science. Uh, Policies are updating such that papers can be written by AIs for scientific journals if they're properly attributed. Of course, figures cannot be AI generated. That's my understanding of the current policy, but that there's much more openness from scientific journals to have content written by AI as long as it's properly disclosed and attributed how that process was done. And we're seeing, and we're in a way part of the reading process also being driven by AIs. And so, uh, I'm curious if you have any thoughts or reactions to kind of this trend, which, to be honest, 2 or 3 years ago, this felt impossible. This felt almost inconceivable that the market would be willing to accept content written by AI and to have AI be fundamental in the reading process, which seems like almost a ubiquitous now that researchers are using tools to help them read content or at least identify the right content. And the process is extending beyond just reading and writing to the review. There are peer review projects underway to have the research that's submitted to scholarly journals be peer reviewed via AI agents as well. And so I'm just curious your reaction to this evolution and the pace of this evolution, given kind of where science was just maybe 2 years ago.
It's fascinating to see. I mean, kind of living through it in real time. Like I don't have very many colleagues that are deep in the middle of their PhD studies or otherwise who have not found a way to leverage large language models in some way. So whether that is as simple as ChatGPT help me write this email to a colleague, to a peer, to a potential collaborator, whomever, especially in the context of English being a second language. So when I'm saying when you're trying to converse with somebody in not your native language and just trying to write an email with a specific tone, whether that be professional or friendly or otherwise, I see that use case a lot. I see a lot of people writing using it to review their writing. So uploading a document to ChatGPT as another example and saying, hey, how is this making sense? What would you add? What would you change? That kind of thing. So I think in some ways, to your broader point, it feels inevitable to me that a lot of these things are happening. And I think that's why you're seeing science react kind of in real time. And they're simply, there is an acknowledgement that regardless of whether we want this to happen or not, this is happening. And so we need to be at the forefront of thinking about how people can do it and lead to an ultimately better product and not dilute the product that already exists. And I think that's the balance. And in many ways, it's a balance where we're trying to work at Scholar AI, right? It's like, how do we help people use this technology, which is very powerful and becoming ubiquitous almost in real time? How do we help them use it so that the science that is created is to the world's betterment and not for the dilution of science? Because I think that if it's not done correctly, you can get diluted science, right? You will get more and more papers that lead to fewer and fewer actionable insights, actionable innovations coming out. And so the question that I think most about, and that I think about kind of on a daily basis, is how do you use these systems to turn the scientific effort that already exists and that can exist into more breakthroughs that actually help people, right? So whether that's new medicines or whatever, if the ultimate result isn't new papers, but if it's actually, world changing technologies, how do you shape AI in a way that leads to more of those results? I think there's lots of opportunity there. And I think that what we're starting to see is people using them to their own behest. And, we'll see these institutions react to those things because they simply had no other choice, I think.
I think at like the most basic level, like especially with our tool and just like the customer like user inbound I generally get, a lot of it seems very like, I guess not surprisingly so, but a lot of the unexpected from when we first started this thing was a lot of people who get benefit from these tools are not English first speakers, right? And especially in the space of science where like you're writing a lot of content, you're ingesting a lot of content. Like if English is not your first language, but you're obviously like an intelligent person, like you're getting rid of what is an actual barrier to your success as a researcher. And so in those cases, I think like it's very, very obvious to me, like why some level of AI being allowed to write papers exists. Like I think like the justification kind of makes a lot of sense in that context. I have some friends who are very much like purists. Like they're like, I don't want AI touching my papers. I don't want AI like influencing how I read papers. I just want to like read the paper, my process, nothing else, right? But I think the like place where I see the most kind of like gray in a lot of those opinions is like, yeah, but maybe like just like gleaning like, is this a useful paper for me or not? Is something an AI can do, right? There's always in the world of science and research, there's so many different points of information exchange that like, regardless of how you feel about them ethically or morally, some of them are just like pretty trivial tasks that just end up taking time. And that seems to have a lot of just inherent value of just like move that quicker. Let me discover papers quicker. Let me just like figure out my literature review section, maybe sources I can use a little bit faster, right? The one thing that's interesting to me about the space of writing papers, especially as it relates to like AI generated content, how that gets injected is at what level do people start like blindly writing content? Because we've already seen that before where people like copy and paste and publish a research paper that will literally say like, as an LLM, I cannot ... and just gets copy and pasted in and creates, that's like the fluff garbage content of what is the entire vector space of papers, right? And that's not great, right? But how do you, at a level, there has to be like a standard of behavior that goes into writing a paper alongside how quality the AI agent becomes. And only at that point does it feel like, okay, it makes proper sense to be kind of like black and white about like, is AI allowed in this case or not? It's just right now that there's user behavior, which is just like, help me write content as fast as possible. I'm not going to read it versus I'm never going to use it. Oh, but it's actually useful in this one case. Maybe I'll just like prune one detail and write my own thing my own way.
If we could somehow efficiently map the inputs that go into writing, the precursors, meaning whatever, if you, in your field, that's data, a certain kind of data set, or statistical analysis. And if on the output, instead of reading the paper, what is it that you're truly trying to get? Perhaps it's a list of methods, perhaps it's a statistical significance or something else. Like if you can kind of isolate the inputs and the outputs, then you could potentially take the reading and writing and put it inside the black box of research in a way. And I think that's maybe one possible direction we go in is to abstract away from the reading and writing toward what are the things you actually care about putting into the system and getting out of the system.
Yep. Agreed. I think that we'll do it for today. We're at about time here. So thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to catch us here next week. Check us out on all of your typical podcast platforms, and check us out on YouTube at the Scholar AI YouTube channel. Remember to leave your comments in the section below and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you all next week. Thanks for joining us.